An older colleague and I sat at a bar after a long day of meetings. We'd been talking all day with a group of people about the future of the church. He sighed. He looked at me and said, "You know, the world is changing so rapidly." I looked at him and said, "I know that's true. I live in California, but you live in Alabama." He said, "Oh, don't misunderstand me. It's been changing in Alabama too." You see, 40 years ago, we didn't even keep track of church attendance or church membership or any of those things. We didn't have to, because 40 years ago, if a man missed church on Sunday, his boss asked him about it at work on Monday. What he and I were talking about was what is now called Christendom. It's the time in the history of the West when Christianity had a home court advantage. I have in my office a copy of the Los Angeles Times from December 1963. It featured an article on the Kennedy assassination and the Warren Commission, and somebody kept it because it was kind of a historical memento. They passed it on to me because it also featured a story on the then 9,000 member Hollywood Presbyterian Church, the largest Presbyterian church in the country in 1963. They gave it to me because I had served there during the 1990s, and they thought that I would find it to be interesting, and I did. I hung on to it. But the reason why I kept it is because there was a box in the LA Times in December 1963 that would give you a week's worth of daily Bible readings. If you can remember a day when the LA Times or the Chicago Tribune or the New York Times or the Washington Post would help you with your morning devotionals, you can remember what sociologists call Christendom. If you go around to almost any small town in America, you'll realize that many of them were founded with the same kind of feel. That it was almost like they had the same city planner. There is in every town square a statue of the most famous dead person. There's a library and a courthouse, and the first church of whoever got there first Baptist, First Lutheran, First Episcopalian, First Methodist. And all the other first churches are all on 2nd Street. And the reason for that, of course, is that everybody assumed in the founding of those towns that culture needs to be centered around law, education, and religion. And that religion was Christian religion. Even in 1963. Remember that in 1963, the Billy Graham Crusades were at an all-time high. People needed Jesus even then. Christendom was not about whether people were Christians. It was about the fact that Christianity had a home court advantage, was in the center of the culture. And that most of us who were trained to be leaders were trained for that world and that day. That's been changing dramatically over the last generation, and it was only accelerated during the pandemic of 2020. We're at a time of deep disruption and change, and it has radically disrupted and changed the church. And none of us have been prepared for this. One person said, "We are now in 1918, 1929, and 1968 all at the same time. We've been in the middle of a health crisis, an economic crisis, a crisis of social injustice that has led to a political crisis and deep divisions in the life of our church. Nobody has been trained for this day." A recent study said 38% of all pastors are ready to throw in the towel. Amongst younger leaders, that's even higher. How do we lead in uncharted territory like this? This course is meant to teach us to lead in a world that you weren't prepared for. Our guides will be none other than the first American adventurers, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. But let's say something right up front. Whenever we draw from history, especially American history, we are wading into territory where there are no perfect people. Indeed, even the Bible itself only holds up one person as worthy of emulating. As one of my professors taught me in seminary, the Bible doesn't give us models to emulate, but mirrors to identify with. And that's what I'm hoping will happen by telling the story of the Corps of Discovery. The Corps of Discovery left St. Charles, Missouri in 1804 to find a water route that would connect the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. This water route would become the center of the economic policy for the young United States of America, as they would then control the key trade routes from Asia to Europe. It was something that European nations had been trying to discover for 300 years. Lewis and Clark's expedition to explore the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase was built on a completely false expectation. They believed, like everyone before them, that the unexplored West was exactly the same geography as the familiar East. They had every expectation that there would be a water route and that they would be able to find it by navigating their way across a landscape by canoe. They also thought that as people of European descent, who they believe had a right to claim this land and profit from it, that their past heritage and history had prepared them for whatever was in front of them. Soon they would discover that not only were they unprepared for what they were going to find, but they would need to turn for help from a most unexpected source for their mission to be a success. This is the story of what they did when they discovered that they and everyone else before them had been wrong. How instructive and inspiring that story can be to us today if we're willing to learn the lessons. Using the story of Lewis and Clark's expedition and applying the best insights from organizational leadership and missional theology, we're going to learn together what it means for Christians to lead when the journey goes off the map. We're going to learn a way of leading when we are no longer experts. We're going to learn how to learn as we go, how to face and take our people through losses, and how to fulfill the mission that we have been given. We will discuss and seek faithful responses to the following questions. How do you lead a congregation to be faithful to the mission that God has put before you when the world has changed so radically? What transformation does it demand of those of us who have been called to lead? In short, how do we learn to lead all over again? Together, we will learn that if you can adapt and adventure, you can thrive. That while leadership in uncharted territory requires both learning and loss, once you realize that the losses won't kill you, then they can teach you. There are 5 vital lessons that every leader of a Christian congregation or organization has to learn in order to lead into uncharted territory. Number 1, the world in front of you is nothing like the world behind you. Indeed, being successful in the past can become the biggest challenge for facing an unknown future. Number 2, no one is going to follow you off the map unless they trust you on the map. Trust is the key currency of a leader. Trust is the critical resource. Without trust, there's no transformation, and without trust, the journey is over. But trust is not enough by itself. Number 3, in uncharted territory, adaptation is everything. Adaptive leadership is required when you find yourself in a position where people look to you as the leader and ask, "What should we do?" And you, if you are honest, must answer, "I don't know, but we are going to figure it out together." Adaptive leadership requires us to focus on what is essential and let go of what is expendable. And in adaptive leadership, the mission, not the preference of some group or even the preference of the leader, but the mission wins every time. Number 4, you can't go alone, but you haven't succeeded until you survive the sabotage. The first principle we will learn from adaptive leadership is that people don't resist change, they resist loss. And since leadership is by definition relational, how does the leader navigate the relational dynamics with people who are experiencing loss and who, because of that loss, is resisting your leadership? Loss and resistance often lead to sabotage, and navigating sabotage while maintaining relationships and furthering your mission when you are no longer the expert, well, that leads to the most important lesson of all. Number 5, everybody will be changed, especially the leader. T.S. Eliot wrote that the end of our exploring was to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And perhaps the place we will know the most profoundly through this leadership is our own souls. The ultimate value and gift of leading into uncharted territory is our own ongoing transformation. To be better leaders, we will need to learn from those whom we've often overlooked along the way. In the same way that Lewis and Clark would have failed or even died in the wilderness without the help of a teenage Native American nursing mother, we who have been trained in a Christendom context will never thrive as leaders as long as the majority world voices around us are silenced. Learning from those who are most at home in uncharted territory is one of the great opportunities that most leaders miss. In God's church, no one is left behind. The whole body of Christ is going on an adventure, or at least preparing the way for God's people to move ahead through the leadership legacy we leave behind. The culture is changing, the world is changing rapidly, and churches are facing change on an unprecedented scale. Churches and church leaders are becoming increasingly irrelevant, even marginalized. Shared corporate faith is viewed with cynicism at best and downright hostility at worst. Less than half of Americans alone report belonging to a church, and amongst those under 45, it's even lower. We have to learn to lead all over again.